And if I told you that the famous serpent in the Garden of Eden, mentioned in Genesis, might not exactly have been a serpent? And if everything you think you know about the story of Adam and Eve needed a deep re-evaluation? Well, hold on to that curiosity, because the truth might be much more fascinating than we imagine. The story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is one of the most well-known narratives in the Bible. At the center of this plot is the cunning and persuasive serpent, who convinces Eve to eat the famous forbidden fruit, triggering what is known as the fall of humanity. Traditionally, we learn that this serpent was literally a snake, a classic symbol of deceit and temptation. But what if we are understanding everything wrong? In this text, we will explore the original Hebrew text of the book of Genesis and uncover a hidden layer of this story that could completely change the way we interpret it. In the end, I promise that you will see the story of Adam and Eve with new eyes, and with reflections that go far beyond what is conventionally taught. Genesis, the first book of the Bible, is the foundation of both Judaism and Christianity. Traditionally attributed to Moses, the book contains narratives that have shaped religious and moral thought for thousands of years. The story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is particularly significant because it deals with fundamental themes: innocence, temptation, free will, and, of course, the human condition. But to truly understand this story, it is essential to grasp the true nature of the characters, especially the serpent. And this takes us directly to the original Hebrew text, where the mystery deepens. In Genesis 3 verse 1, the serpent is introduced with the Hebrew word Nachash, generally translated as serpent or snake. This word has much richer and more complex meanings. Hebrew, a language full of nuances, presents us here with a term that goes beyond what it seems at first glance. Yes, Nachash can mean serpent, but in other contexts, it can also refer to a diviner or someone who practices enchantments. This seemingly small detail opens the door to a new interpretation. What if the serpent was, in fact, a figure with knowledge or supernatural powers? Over the centuries, scholars have intensely debated the true nature of the serpent. Some suggest that Nachash should be understood metaphorically, as a representation of chaotic forces or even a divine being in rebellion. Others point out that the serpent might not have been a literal animal, but a symbolic figure, perhaps a fallen angel, or even a manifestation of Satan. A particularly interesting interpretation is the idea that the serpent could represent a divine rebel. Imagine something similar to the character Prometheus from Greek mythology, who defied the gods by bringing knowledge to humans. From this perspective, the serpent would not be merely a deceiver, but a much more complex figure, playing the role of both tempter and, at the same time, illuminator. What does this mean for us today? If we consider these possibilities, the story of Adam and Eve takes on completely new layers. The serpent would not be just a symbol of betrayal or disobedience, but also of choices and their consequences, of human curiosity and the desire to transcend imposed limits. This interpretation does not contradict the biblical narrative, but expands it, inviting us to reflect more deeply on the nature of freedom, knowledge, and the responsibilities that come with them. So, the next time you hear about the serpent in the Garden of Eden, remember, perhaps it was never just a serpent. And, who knows, what it really represents might be much more fascinating and provocative than we imagine. Now, imagine for a moment that the famous serpent of the Garden of Eden was something beyond what we traditionally understand. And what if, in fact, it carried a much more complex identity, with profound meanings and connections to ancient mythologies? When we explore the Hebrew term Nachash, with its rich variety of meanings, we pave the way for fascinating interpretations, which give the serpent a more complex role than just a symbol of deception. Let's then delve into some intriguing possibilities and discover what the serpent could truly represent, considering it from different perspectives: a divine being, a symbol of chaos, and even a metaphorical figure. Some scholars suggest that the serpent could have been a divine being, perhaps a minor god or even a demigod. This interpretation connects with the mythologies of the ancient Near East, where serpents were often associated with wisdom, immortality, and even divine power. In various ancient cultures, snakes were revered. For example, in Mesopotamian mythology, the god Ninhursag, associated with vegetation and the underworld, was depicted as a serpent or with serpentine features. In Egyptian mythology, the snake symbolized Wadjet, a protective goddess associated with royal authority and divine royalty. These cultural connections show that snakes were not seen merely as treacherous creatures, but also as powerful and wise beings, worthy of respect. Thus, interpreting the serpent in Genesis as a divine being leads us to see it as a figure that possesses profound knowledge and maintains a unique relationship with the divine itself. From this perspective, the act of tempting Eve by the serpent ceases to be a mere deception. Instead, it becomes a complex interaction involving divine knowledge and human free will, leading us to reflect on the delicate balance between the human desire to know more and the boundaries established by God. In many ancient cultures, the serpent was also a symbol of chaos and disorder. Within this interpretation, the serpent in Genesis can be seen as a representation of the forces that challenge divine order and test human obedience. This understanding is reinforced by the role of the serpent in leading Adam and Eve to disobedience, introducing chaos into a world that, until then, was perfectly harmonious. Here, the Garden of Eden symbolizes divine order, while the serpent emerges as an agent of chaos, disturbing the ideal harmony created by God. This theme resonates in various ancient myths. In Babylonian mythology, for example, the monster Tiamat, often described as a serpent or dragon, represents the primordial chaos that the god Marduk must overcome to bring order to the world. Similarly, in Norse mythology, Jormungandr, the gigantic serpent of Midgard, symbolizes a constant threat to the stability of the cosmos. When we apply this symbolic structure to the Genesis narrative, the serpent can be seen as part of a greater cosmic conflict. It represents the disruptive forces that challenge divine order and test the limits of humanity. This interpretation highlights the eternal struggle between stability and disorder, a recurring theme in creation mythologies and deeply connected to the human experience. Another fascinating view is that the serpent can be understood as a powerful metaphor. In this approach, it embodies the internal conflict between obedience to God and the human desire to seek knowledge, even if it means surpassing established boundaries. From this perspective, the serpent symbolizes human curiosity and the desire for autonomy. When Eve and Adam eat the forbidden fruit, this act is not just a simple transgression, but a manifestation of humanity's deep desire for understanding and self-determination. Here, the serpent is not just an external figure of temptation, but a representation of the internal struggle that each person faces throughout life, to follow established rules or to explore the unknown. This interpretation connects the Genesis narrative to universal themes of morality, philosophy, and even literature. Many philosophical currents see the pursuit of knowledge as a fundamental characteristic of human beings. The serpent, in this case, comes to symbolize this struggle for understanding, challenging the divine order to achieve something greater. When exploring these different interpretations of the serpent in Genesis, one thing becomes clear: it is much more than a mere creature of deception. Whether as a divine being, a symbol of chaos, or a metaphorical figure, the serpent invites us to reflect on the dilemmas of human existence, the balance between order and disorder, the tension between obedience and freedom, and the cost of knowledge. Each of these interpretations enriches the narrative, transforming the story of Adam and Eve into something much greater than just a moral lesson. It is an invitation to dive deeper, challenge our assumptions, and see the biblical text in a new light. After all, perhaps the serpent in the Garden of Eden was never just a serpent. In many ancient traditions and narratives, the theme of forbidden knowledge is central, being approached in different ways across various cultures and mythologies. A clear example of this is Paradise Lost by John Milton, where the serpent, identified as Satan, tempts Eve by appealing to the human desire for wisdom and autonomy. This theme resonates deeply with ancient stories, such as that of Prometheus in Greek mythology, who defies the gods to bring fire, a symbol of knowledge and power, to humanity. Both stories explore the tension between divine authority and the human impulse to seek knowledge, suggesting that this pursuit, although risky, is also essential for human progress. This interpretation broadens the view of the serpent in Genesis. If before we understood the serpent as a simple figure of deception, now we can see it as more than just a literal snake. It becomes a complex symbol of rebellion, chaos, but also of enlightenment. By reconsidering the serpent as a divine being or demigod, we begin to see its interaction with Eve as a crucial moment not only in the biblical narrative but also in the history of human development and consciousness. When we revisit the story of Adam and Eve, we see that the serpent is not just a tempter or a deceiver. She serves as a catalyst for a much greater journey, the journey of humanity towards self-knowledge and wisdom. By eating the forbidden fruit, Adam and Eve are not just disobeying a divine order, but making the transition from innocence to understanding. This moment symbolizes the first conscious choice and the awakening of humanity to the complexities of morality and existence itself. This new perspective on the serpent has profound theological implications. Instead of simply rebuking the serpent as a force of evil, we are challenged to consider whether the temptation was, in some way, a necessary part of God's plan for human development. The pursuit of knowledge, after all, is an inevitable step in the spiritual and intellectual evolution of humanity. For many modern believers, this reinterpretation can enrich their understanding of the Bible, inviting them to see the scriptures in a more complex and open light. It encourages us to perceive the biblical stories not just as simple moral tales, but as multifaceted narratives, rich in symbolism and meaning. In Genesis 3 verse 1, we are introduced to the serpent with a description that it was more cunning than any other beast of the field which the Lord God had made. The Hebrew term for shrewd, aram, implies not only intelligence but also a form of cunning or insight. If the serpent is interpreted as a divine or semi-divine figure, its cunning suggests a deep understanding of spiritual issues and a significant role in interacting with the divine plan. Instead of being simply a deceiver, the serpent could be seen as a figure that brings to light complex issues about human freedom, knowledge, and moral choices. In Genesis 3 verses 4 to 5, the serpent says to Eve, "You will certainly not die, for God knows that on the day you eat from it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." Here, the serpent promises Eve enlightenment, a concept that aligns with the idea of a divine rebel who defies a higher order to bring benefits to humanity. This echoes the story of Prometheus in Greek mythology, who, by defying Zeus, brought fire to humanity, despite the dramatic consequences for himself. The similarity between the serpent and Prometheus is striking. Both bring knowledge to humanity, both are seen as challengers of divine authority, and both face the consequences of their actions. The parallel doesn't stop there. In various ancient mythologies, such as the Sumerian, we find divine figures who defy the god's rules to help humanity. Enki, the god of wisdom, frequently acted against the desires of the higher gods to benefit humanity. This quest for forbidden knowledge is seen as an essential step for human development, even if it involves risks and dangers. The serpent in Genesis can be seen in the same way, a figure that opens doors to new understanding, offering humanity the knowledge of good and evil. This reinterpretation of the serpent challenges us to engage more deeply with the Bible and to consider the layers of meaning hidden in the ancient words. Understanding the original languages and the cultural contexts that shape the sacred texts is fundamental to extracting their true meaning. By doing this, we can discover more nuanced interpretations that reflect the complexity and depth of the biblical characters and stories. When we look at the serpent not just as a tempter, but also as a figure that drives humanity to reach a deeper level of understanding and freedom, the story of Adam and Eve gains new layers of meaning. Instead of seeing the serpent merely as absolute evil, we can begin to see the challenge it represents as part of a greater process of human growth and evolution. This richer view of the serpent in Genesis not only offers a new perspective on temptation, but also invites us to reflect on human nature and the limits of knowledge, freedom, and obedience. It highlights the fundamental paradox that, often, knowledge and enlightenment come with challenges and consequences. As such, the story of Adam and Eve teaches us that the pursuit of wisdom is both a blessing and a curse, a tortuous and often painful path, but essential for humanity. This deeper look at the serpent in Genesis allows us to explore the biblical texts in a richer and more informed way. By understanding the traditions that involve forbidden knowledge, the role of deities, and the tensions between order and chaos, we can reach a more complete understanding of the spiritual complexity contained in these texts. And this, in turn, challenges us to see our own journey of faith and knowledge in a new light, recognizing the beauty and the inherent dangers in the pursuit of truth and enlightenment. May the pursuit of wisdom and truth always be guided by divine light, which illuminates the paths of the mind and heart. That, as we explore the depths of knowledge, we may be vigilant and wise, recognizing that every truth, no matter how revealing, brings with it the responsibility to use what we have learned for the common good and the strengthening of our faith. May the understanding of the Scriptures envelop us with grace, leading us not only to wisdom but also to humility, so that we may discern the paths of justice and peace. That, just like Adam and Eve, in making decisions, we may always remember that true freedom lies in choosing the good, even in the face of temptations that arise. May the serpent, a symbol of challenges and temptations, be transformed into a constant reminder that knowledge is only complete when we seek not only to understand the world but also the divine purpose in our lives. May each step in our journey of faith be blessed with discernment, courage, and peace, and may we, with wisdom, integrate the ancient teachings with the grace that God offers us each new day. Amen.